Hello my friends, and welcome to a more informal video because currently I am in preparations for my move to Florida and I don't have as much time on my hands, so I figured I would give myself a little bit of a break and just talk directly to you about something that's not really a philosophical evaluation of an anime, but is something that I run into a lot as I'm looking for shows that I want to evaluate. And that's essentially that I run into a lot of pretentious anime when I'm trying to find something that I think will be a good candidate for a philosophical evaluation. And when I say pretentious, I don't mean elitist, I don't mean preachy, though it can definitely seem that way. They're pretty darn close together. No, I mean a show specifically that is trying to sell you on its pretense alone. That it's trying to sell you on what it wants you to think the show is going to be, even if the show isn't actually going to deliver on that pretense in any way. For an example that literally everyone will be aware of, I can point to Sword Art Online, where, regardless of whether you think that show is good or not, my personal opinion is that the first season was actually fine, but it got worse by the end of it and then became garbage over more time. But the very first episode of Sword Art Online essentially gathered all of the potential cast into one city, into one room, so that the creator of the game world could preach to everyone about how dangerous the situation is and they're all gonna die now because he's an evil overlord in a big scary red coat. And that was essentially just trying to deliver a story that was going to be a grueling, dark, and edgy tale about trying to survive in a digital world. But in reality, the first season of Sword Art Online was, like, really chill. It was better than the pretense that it set up, because the pretense it set up was, like, trying too hard. It was kind of garbage. And so it's good that the show dropped the pretense, but it did a thing that was trying to deliver an expectation, get you to watch the show by making you think it's the thing you want, and then hoping that if you watch one episode once a week for 3 weeks, it becomes habitual and you just stay with the show the whole time. And it's pretty easy to accomplish that, especially since the anime community online has developed this whole 3-episode rule where you have to watch 3 episodes of a show before you can determine whether or not it has any quality to you. And, you know, I don't agree with that. I don't think you can necessarily just figure out if a show is good or bad from 1 episode. But at a certain point, you know if you want to keep watching. And if you don't, then don't keep watching. It's as simple as that. The first show that I really want to point out that uses a very specific strategy that I keep seeing over and over again in anime was Musaigen no Phantom World. If you remember that show, chances are it's the one you remember for the main female character who does a bunch of punches and kicks but also has to grope herself to get her magic powers to work, and then also she has that really infamous limbo scene that I'm sure you've seen, and I don't have to explain it more than that. But what that show did is, at the beginning of every episode, they basically quoted some, particularly influential figure or something and tried to establish it as something significant to the phenomenon of all these monsters showing up in the world and how that idea was going to have an impact on the story. And, I'm pretty sure they mentioned Freud multiple times, but, at the end of the show, none of those ideas were actually significant to anything that the show covered. For the most part, it was just a story that ended up being about emotional fulfillment for different things. And those things could be like animals or telephone wires or things like that, but it was really just about like, let's tell an emotional arc about this thing that people don't treat well or think fondly of anymore. More recently, though, another show made me think that it was going to go somewhere, and that show is called Caligula, where in the very first episode, it starts off with this big speech by the main character, or some main character, about, honestly at this point I can't even remember, I think it might have been Nietzsche or something, and it was talking about, you know, how significant this idea is going to be. But then by episode 3, maybe it was 2, gosh, but probably episode 3, the entire episode was spent on how horrible one of the main cast was, because she just hated fat people so much. She hated fat people so much, and because her mother was fat and ate food like a human, she drove her mother into depression and then anorexia, and she didn't learn her lesson, and she was trying to be all nice and sweet, and then it just has a diatribe of her screaming at a bunch of, you know, ladies eating food that turned into gluttonous pig monsters, at an old guy who was pretending to be a cute girl because magic, and she was just screaming at these characters about how horrible and evil it was to be fat, and how the show essentially presented her as a horrible person for being mean to fat people. And like, it was the most distasteful, forced, and honestly overplayed depiction of like a story of like, just let people do their own thing, and they wasted an entire episode on it. I was done. That show tried to seem cool, seem deep and thoughtful by giving a diatribe at the start, just like Museigen no Phantom World did every episode, just giving a look at me educated diatribe at the start, and then made a story that was completely irrelevant to it. So when it comes to this, I guess you could call it a problem, more like this trope, this like establishing shot trope that shows try to go for. I guess it's important to keep in mind that it's a red flag for a show. It's a red flag that says, hey, this show is trying to set a really high bar expectation for itself. It's probably not going to meet that bar, just considering the likelihood that they have the resources and the writers in this particular story to make it happen. But, you know, in my experience, the shows that give the greatest delivery on deep and thought-provoking ideas aren't the ones that tell you right at the very beginning, hey look, I have a deep and thought-provoking idea, you should listen. I guess one that comes to mind is Kisniver, which seemed like it was going to be a really, really stupid show at the start. And boy, it was so stupid. The show was stupid in great ways, and it became hyper melodramatic the way teenagers act about themselves. And you know, there was a lot of stupidity in how the characters chose to behave, their decisions, actively making decisions that weren't in their best interest, and then amplifying that because they were all connected and shared all their pain and emotional back problems and traumas, and cortisol out the wazoo for everyone. But that show actually did deliver on a significant and impactful idea, and I made an evaluation on my channel, on this channel here, because of that. So just keep in mind that shows that are stupid, or at least shows that are allowed or let themselves realize how dumb they're being, like don't take themselves too seriously, can often deliver the best and deepest narratives. Juni Taisen, another example. I made two separate analyses on that show, and that was just a run-of-the-mill battle royale ripoff that, surprise, had actually some pretty cool, unique little ideas for it. However, I will say, again, I'll try to get to this point because I lost track of myself there, is that just because there is a preachy, pretentious opener line that tries to get you sold in that very first second, just wants you to say, hey, this looks smart, I'm smart, I want to watch it. But I actually had this same fear when I first started playing Nier Automata, and anyone who watches this channel knows that I absolutely love Nier. I love Nier Automata, it's my #1 favorite game of all time now, but I was really worried right at the start, because 2B delivers that line of, I often think about the god that made this world, and if we'll ever have a chance to kill him. And it's like, oh, okay, thanks, high school kid who read Nietzsche once and now thinks he knows everything about philosophy. Ugh. And let me tell you, I met that kid who read Nietzsche and then decided they knew everything they needed to know about philosophy. A lot. In college, I met that kid a lot. In law school, there's more to philosophy than just Beyond Good and Evil or Thus Spake Zarathustra, yeah. But anyways, I guess that's all it's really hot in my apartment. There's nothing I can do about that. Nebraska heat will always get you down. And I can never look directly at the camera for long enough. I always look away. And then I guess today I was just wiping my eyes the whole time. Prolonged eye contact for the end here. So that's really all I have to say on this. Like I said, it was a really light video, just so that I could give myself a little bit more time, get caught up with what I need to do in real life, and also have something coming out on the channel. But we do have more actual formal analyses coming, I promise. I'm not stopping that. And I'm determined to make sure that we have this entire year filled out, at least, one semi-decent video a week, if this doesn't really count as good. But I hope you enjoyed it. If you did and you're new, go ahead and hit the like, subscribe, comment, whatever you want. This was really informal. So if you just want to chat about whatever, some shows that you particularly felt were overly preachy or pretentious, I'd be happy to talk about that. Let's just rag on some anime in the comments, because there's a lot of trash anime out there, and I really don't get enough time to talk about all the bad ones. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you again for watching, and as always, stay true.